to introduce Dr. Kathleen Mammel and Therese Scarpace, both from Beaumont Hospital, and they're going to be speaking to us today on childhood and adolescent sexual development, and they'll tell you a little bit more about themselves as they come up to speak. Thank you very much.
I don't know if those of you in the back may want to move a little closer. I'm going to refer a little bit to some pre-written, scrawled items here. I'm Kathy Mammel. I'm from Beaumont Adolescent Medicine. I run the adolescent clinic for Beaumont Hospitals and teach our residents in adolescent health. And Therese and I also serve the adolescent eating disorder population around here through a grant program, the Huff Center for Eating Disorders, which is co-located with us in one of the off-site offices of Beaumont. I think talking about sexuality is something that's really important that we all need to be doing with our kids. And there's a number of different areas we can cover today, and we want to sort of meet some of your needs as well here. So I want to just ask a few questions of all of you. First of all, how many of you have teenagers currently? And how many have those in high school? How many in middle school? How many more elementary age? And some preteens, I guess, in between the elementary and the middle schoolers. Great. Who has questions about growth and development and what's normal, or do you kind of have that part down? A little bit of that, okay. What about questions around talking about sexuality and sex with teenagers or with children? I'm glad to hear that, because I think that's really the important area. We're definitely going to address that today. More concerns about girls, concerns about boys, both, okay, all right. Questions about contraception, not so much an issue, a little bit of an issue, okay. Maybe we can make some time at the end for that. Who here was a teenager once? Who as a kid or a teen ever had a question about sex or sexuality? Who was afraid to ask? Who didn't know who to ask, or maybe where to go for information at some particular time? I think that's a pretty universal thing, and that even is today for teenagers and preteens. And how do our kids get information these days? Internet, more media than we had when we were growing up. You know, there were books and occasional, you know, ones that were a little more risque passed around at school, or there might have been a few borderline things on TV, or a little bit of sexual innuendo on advertising that sort of increased over the years. But now it's just like blaring at you everywhere. And there's new media, and there's movies that kids have access to at home, on television, through cable, whatever. They manage to find information everywhere, and even when they're not looking for it, and it may or may not be correct information, and it may be frightening information.
Kathy, I'm going to interject here too, and one of the great sources to find out information about sex is through their friends.
Yes.
The playground is our worst enemy sometimes, or recess, luncheon, when they socialize, because they share this information, and it's 99% incorrect information or distorted information. I love to hear those stories. So you be the experts for your children.
So exactly, yeah. So who thinks parents should play a role in educating their children about sexuality? Exactly, and that's why you're here today. And I think we have an even bigger job now. You know, in some ways it's less taboo to talk about sex this generation than previously, but we have a lot more information, misinformation, that we need to counter with accurate information, helpful information, and help kids to see sex and sexuality as wholesome and part of normal life, and not something that's just associated with violence or is tainted in some way. And we want to inspire our kids to be in control of their feelings and emotions and their sexuality. So I presume not all of us feel fully equipped and ready to deal with this, or you wouldn't be attending this today. But I think you all agree that it's important to be talking to our kids about sexuality. So I want to start just a little bit with talking about how to be an askable parent. Saul Gordon, who many of you have probably heard of, great, wonderful educator and parenting educator, says that parents are the main sex educators of their children, whether they like it or not. And I think that's a great position for us to be in. It's just that we need to be more ready to combat the bombardment of the disturbing sexual misinformation from the media these days. And we have these tiny voices in comparison. So any amount of talking we do is still going to be disproportionate to everything else they're hearing. To be an askable parent, we need to be prepared for any question or any incident or event that may come up. Our best first response when those questions come up might be, "That's a good question." We must convey to our kids that nothing will be made worse by talking to a parent about it. And I'm not just talking about sexuality-related issues here. It could be anything. It could be their grades in school or, something that maybe they shouldn't have done. And so our best first response for these kinds of incidents that could come up is, "I'm so glad you were able to talk to me about this." You're going to just see them relax when they finally have the courage to come bring something like that to you. When you can say something affirming as your starting point, it also gives you a chance to kind of wait, catch my breath, what just happened, what am I going to do, and take your pulse and calm down. We also need, Saul Gordon says, to remember that kids aren't perfect, just like parents aren't perfect, and it's up to parents to turn kids' mistakes into teaching opportunities, learning growth opportunities. We also need to remember that failure is an event, not a person, so that if we can sort of put a distance between what happened between our child and whatever goes on, and see it as separate from who they are as a person, and help them with managing whatever is happening in their lives. Children who are loved grow into adults who love themselves and are likely to love others and unlikely to exploit others or to be vulnerable to exploitation themselves. So we also need to be more than just askable parents, though, because we need to initiate the discussions when it comes to sexuality. And we need to seize whatever opportunities are presented to us to have frank and knowledgeable conversations, discussions with our kids about topics like where do babies come from, correct naming of body parts, the sizes of penises and breasts, menstruation, erections and wet dreams, masturbation, and by the way, that's something that's normal and private, not bad. And being ready to have discussions about advice on avoiding lines like, you'd have sex with me if you loved me, and teaching our kids, that if they really loved you, they wouldn't say that. They're manipulating you. People who love you don't manipulate you. To put things into perspective from the teenager's point of view, about 40 to 50% of teenagers for each of these things say that they've discussed with their parents. About 40 to 50% of them have said that they have discussed how to know when you're ready to have sex, have discussed issues like pregnancy, contraception, sexually transmitted infections, including HIV and AIDS, and condom use. But about 78 to 83% of kids are worried about their parents' reaction if they were to bring something like this up, or embarrassed, or think that their parent will worry that, oh, they must be having sex, or they're going to have sex if they bring up this topic, or they just plain don't know how to bring it up with their parents. So we need to be more than askable. We need to reach out to them. We need to take the opportunity to talk about sex before they bring it up. So on one of the handouts that you may have picked up from out in the hall, it lists the characteristics of parents of sexually healthy adolescents. And just to touch on those a little bit, so valuing, respecting, accepting, and trusting our children from the beginning. And I'm so glad so many of you are parents of elementary school age, because you cannot start too soon. I think starting earlier makes things easier. And valuing them as a person is going to go a long way. It's a powerful message that you're sending in terms of sexual health in the long run. Modeling healthy behaviors in our own relationships, being non-punitive about sexuality and knowledgeable about it and discussing it, seeking guidance and information as you need it when they see that you don't necessarily always have all the answers, but you're willing to go help figure them out and get answers with them. That's teaching them how to seek accurate information too. Trying to understand their viewpoint and respect their viewpoint while at the same time imparting your values and what direction you'd like to guide them. Explore their values. And then setting and maintaining standards and limits for dating and other activities. I was always so appreciative of hearing Mr. Proctor, the principal at Groves High School where my kids attended, saying nothing good happens after midnight. You know, I think supporting the community of parents, supporting each other in, you know, what do we think is reasonable for our kids and what limits and standards are we going to have is very helpful. And so there are key people in our community, like the high school principal, who can kind of help parents support each other in that when their kids are telling them, well, so-and-so's mom says they can be out till whatever, when we know that there are plenty of other parents who share our point of view. Staying involved in their lives, assisting them in accessing health services when they need it, and helping them to plan for their futures. So how and when do we bring up information? Well, TV shows, movies, they provide great opportunities, items in the newspaper, magazine ads even. These are opportunities where we can bring up sex and sexuality with it being very depersonalized. You know, if something happens at school to a friend or a peer and we bring that up for discussion, they may kind of take the defensive. Even if it's not about them personally, they may take the defensive for their friends. But if you see something on TV, you may, you know, or in a magazine ad, you may sort of ask about, well, what's wrong with this picture? Wasn't that guy with that other woman last week? And, you know, did they have that contraception discussion before they got in bed together? What's wrong with this ad? You know, what do you think they're really selling in this advertisement? Sex is used so much in ads. When they hint at something, just take the bold step and open up discussion. Don't wait for them to kind of get over that huge embarrassment or anxiety. You can also surprise them and make an appointment to say, you know what, this Friday night, instead of game night, instead of watching a movie, instead of going out with, we're going to talk about sex. You know, and they might be swept off their feet. My kids they laughed when I said that one evening. Humor is really a great thing to use. I still remember when my son had just been in the 5th grade or 4th grade, whatever age they gave the kind of sexuality movie at school. And we were coming home from a church potluck, and they had lots of leftover chicken, and it was really hot, and they wrapped it up in foil to send home with families. And my 2 kids, it was winter, they were arguing over who got to carry it because it was warm in the cold car. So my son won the flip and had it sitting in his lap, and I made some comment, you know, just be careful about the family jewels. And he's like, Mom! And my daughter's like, what? And she's a year older. And I said, well, tell her. And the car is a great place to talk because they're a captive audience and you don't have to make direct eye contact. And he said, well, it's your private parts. And after a little bit of pressure from me that he had to say something, I said, well, what's the scientific name? You know, trying to remind him that you know the real words. And he says, privatus particus. So we had a good laugh about that. And it was like, yeah, but we can also say testicles or testes too. It's perfectly fine. So I think we have to be comfortable using this terminology, and we can use humor to help ourselves through it as well. Asking your kids their opinion, you know, well, what could someone have done in this situation, or what might have been a better choice for them? That's a great way to open up discussion too. And as mentioned, it helps to start young. Sexuality is much broader than sex. I think when we often talking about sexuality with our kids and them with us. They think it's just about sex. And I think realizing that helps to reduce everybody's anxiety. We're all sexual beings from the day we're born and until the day we die. And so that's something that I think Therese is going to talk a little bit more about. On the flip side of that first handout, there are some, there's the sex and sensibility comments. And let's see if I can find where I put that. The sex, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, sex and sensibility. All right. I saw my version, not your version. Thank you for pointing that out. So sexuality includes how we see ourselves, including our gender identity, how the world sees us as male or female, our gender role, as well as our sexual orientation or preference. And the whole person and their intimate emotional relationships with others are what make up sexuality. It's not just body parts. And we really need to be outspoken about that with our kids. We cannot be silent or unclear or talk in code. We need to give them accurate and factual information, as well as implanting values and imparting values and giving them guidance. And as mentioned before, we need to define and set limits. One of my former school classmates, Lisa Jander, from around this area, wrote a book in the last few years called Dater's Ed, the instruction manual for parents. And she takes a similar approach to teaching our kids about dating and relationships that Driver's Ed does for teaching them about driving. And if you think about it, you know, we get pretty worked up about handing over car keys to our kids, but she opens her book with, "Geez, Mom, I'm old enough to drive, why can't I date?" And then goes through the various analogies, you know, buckle up, it's the law of attraction, model appropriate relationships in our lives, drive it home, send that message home, take things for a test drive, the road test, read your car manual. So all these things we can use in parallel. Think about what we invest in driver's education for our kids. And who they are as a person and a sexual human being, I think, is even far more important. So setting those limits, kids thrive with structure. They feel much more secure. We can set our limits and boundaries a little stricter maybe than necessary, so then they can still feel adventuresome but stay within a safe zone. Teens don't really necessarily understand that sex is more than an act. They need help seeing the behaviors on a continuum and that they're in parallel to emotions and degrees of intimacy in a relationship. And they need to understand what makes a relationship safe for sex emotionally, socially, and physically. We need to really break the cycle of too little, too late, myths, double standards. We need to speak up for females, and we also need to be recognizing that males are vulnerable as well, and they often get the short shrift when it comes to sexuality education. We need to make things less taboo as well, and I want to shift over here for a moment. I hope you can still hear me. And you may not be able to see this from the back, but it's not critical that you can read it exactly. I have men or males on the upper line, and I have women down below, and this is ages 10, 15, 20, so on. The average age of girls starting menstrual periods, so being reproductively capable, is 12.6 years. The average age for boys starting to be able to produce live sperm is age 14. The average age in the United States for people to have first sexual intercourse for boys is 17, for girls is 17.4. The average age of first marriage in this country is 25 for women and 26.7 for men. So that's, and the first birth to females is at 26 and to males is at 28. So that's 14 years from the time a girl becomes capable of reproduction until she has her first birth. That's more than half of her life has passed in that time. For boys, it's also 14 years from when they become capable to when they have fathered their first child. So this is a long stretch of time to be learning to manage emotions, hormones, relationships, and not have adverse outcomes such as sexually transmitted infections, unintended pregnancies. So I think this is really important to keep in mind. There's been an abundance of research in recent years looking at European models and looking at the U.S. And I had the opportunity to hear Amy Shalit, a psychologist from the Netherlands. She actually was born in New York but raised in the Netherlands, who's done a very interesting comparative study between the Netherlands and the U.S. And she talks about how in the Netherlands, boys and girls have first sexual intercourse at very comparable ages to the U.S., around 17, 18 years of age. Their first marriage is at an older age, more like 29 and 31 for females and males. And pregnancy and abortion and birth rates are much lower in the Netherlands than in the U.S. It's about a fifth or a sixth of the rate here for all of them. Contraceptive use at first intercourse is much higher, but they're not having sex at an earlier age than here. But the most interesting difference between adolescent sexuality there and here is how it's viewed. And so the U.S. is going to be on the left in each of these. So in the U.S., as she interviewed various parents of teenagers, she discovered there were sort of three main themes around sexuality. In the U.S., we view teenagers having these raging hormones that are out of control, and that we perceive this battle of the sexes, and we also have this view of that's not happening under my roof. So this raging hormones has to do with more the adolescent themselves and their relationship with their own sexuality. The battle of the sexes has to do with the relationship between them and the opposite sex. And the not under my roof characterizes the parent-adolescent relationship. In the Netherlands, however, they view sexuality more with this idea of readiness and regulation. They see the adolescent as learning to regulate emotions and be in control of their hormones, and that they're not out of control. They're capable. They build on this, they empower this capability. And they look at the relationship between the sexes, and they see sex, the parents see sex as normal and non-secretive. What parents expect, the parents there expect that one will be mentally prepared and capable of contraception, as well as integrating responsibility with pleasure, and that this is a process of learning that they have. They also recognize that young people can be in love, whereas we found that in the U.S. we sort of diminish the feelings between teenagers, that, oh, it's puppy love, or, it's just, it's just romance, it's not really a real love relationship. So we have a different view there. Where's my, here we go. So in the U.S., she said that there's really this theme of dramatization, whereas in the Netherlands and other European countries, there's this view of normalization of the sexual development. Whereas we see sex as risk-taking, love as extraordinary, and sex as secret. In the Netherlands, they see that there's this preparation phase through sexual development, and love is normal, and sex is a negotiation process in the right context at the right time. So rather than continuing with the paradigm we have here in the U.S., which our two main paradigms is abstinence, just say no, or seeing sex as risk-taking behavior, even though 99.some% of the population eventually becomes sexually active. It's not like drugs where you say no forever for everybody. In the Netherlands, she's proposing that we adapt their paradigm, this ABC paradigm, where we teach sexual agency, where adolescents would have control over decision making, that they would recognize that they need to communicate their wishes and their boundaries, that they need to be prepared, and that sex can be pleasurable in the right relationship. They do not support one-night stands and things like that either. They may be a little more liberal than the U.S., but I don't think it's the extreme that one might associate with this. B is building relationships, building romantic relationships, building trust, not only with their romantic partner, but trust with their parents, and developing an enjoyment of each other's company, not just in a sexual way. And then C is connecting, that there needs to be connection between teens and the care providers. And their care providers would be their parents first, but then also their health care providers as well. And to be able to have open communication, honest communication, and having integrity in that communication, or wholeness, that they don't have to leave out part of themselves in the process. So I'm not suggesting that we have parent-approved sleepovers, as some do in the Netherlands, but I do believe that empowering and building capacity and control over ourselves and our emotions in our children and our teenagers is an area in the area of sexuality, as in any area of their life. We want them to have capacity and empowerment over doing their math homework and succeeding in school, or doing well in sports, or participating in a team. So building on that same paradigm, that we could embrace this more around sexuality in the United States, and could lead to our kids turning into adults who are having healthier relationships. I'm going to make a couple last comments and turn things over to Therese here. Ken Ginsberg is another person who's done a lot of great promoting of adolescent health and building resilience in children and teens. He's an adolescent medicine physician like I am in Pennsylvania. And he talks about the 7 C's to promote resiliency. That we want young people to be inspired and empowered by a vision of what to be, not by what not to be. Because kids are going to either live up to our expectations or live down to them. So much better to inspire them rather than to be worrying and pulling them down. Don't do this, don't do that. Let's do this, let's do that. And so he talks about these 7 C's, or the C traits to build in our adolescents. And they are confidence, competence, connectedness, character, contribution, coping, very important in our world today, and locus of control. In other words, that they take an active role in their lives, not waiting for it to happen to them in a passive way. So when we're concerned about our adolescents, Dr. Ginsberg suggests we can say, I love you. I love you, I love you, I love you is actually the way he says it. I'm feeling worried about something. May I address it? And when you first reassure your child that you love them, and then as a parent, it's our job to be careful, to be caring for them and watching for situations that concern us, and to let them know when we're concerned or worried. And then it's our job to help guide them through it. So may I address it? And asking may I address it builds on respect for the adolescent. And if they say, no, you cannot, okay, it's important that I do address this with you, and let's pick a time to do that if it's not right now. But you have to set that firm boundary as well. The materials I gave you are mostly from the Advocates for Youth website. There is a wealth of information. When I went to duplicate a handout to see if there was an updated one from 2002 and went to their website, I was startled. I had no idea they had so much stuff there. But it's www.advocatesforyouth.org. Where did I just put it? It was on the front page. I'll write it on the board here because I think it came with /parents at the end. It may be on the bottom of one of your handouts as well. So I'm going to stop and let Therese say a few words, and I'll write the websites up here on the whiteboard if I don't distract you by doing that. And then we'll take questions after she talks about anything else you want to ask.
And I think it's important that we hear from you and what your specific needs are when we talk about sexuality. And I'm kind of going to go in the reverse and talk about our children as human sexual beings from the time they're born. And being a practicing social worker long before I had children, that was what I wanted to follow, my philosophy or paradigm I wanted to follow for my own children. And I wanted to give you a very strong visual that I have about sexuality. My daughter was quite small, toddler, in that potty training phase, and my brother, who's an engineer, no disrespect, but sometimes he doesn't see things like I do. And my daughter came out and I said, did you wipe your vagina too? Because she was having issues. And my brother looked horrified. His face went white, his jaw dropped. He goes, "You can't say that." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, what should I say?" "I don't know, but not that." And I still remember that. My daughter is now 25 years old, and I still have it in my head, and I see him, and paybacks are wonderful. He is a father now, and I remind him every now and then of those days when my child was little, and he deals with those too. But the important thing is that from the time they are born, they are sexual beings. It's a normal process. And I have dealt with, throughout my career, children in sexuality at a very young age. Unfortunately, when it came to sexual assault and sexual abuse, but on through my adolescent work with Dr. Mammel. And it's important to realize that starting a foundation at a young age, at a toddler age, and swimsuits are a great tool in trying to instill the fact that there is privacy about our physicalness and our bodies. Why do we cover up those parts? Well, and information that they can understand, even a 3-year-old, we cover up those parts of our body because that's private, because that tells us physically if we're male, female, girl or boy, or what your terminology is. And the other thing is that we do have to set a standard for what verbiage or vocabulary we use for words. I've been practicing for almost 30 years, and I have a running binder of names that family members call body parts. I want to concur with Dr. Mammel that using the clinical or medical term is important as well for safety issues. And when an adolescent goes to the physician, we have those cutesy names. But when you use words like pocketbook or vajayjay and things like that, and something happens or a child says something in school, no one knows that terminology. So the medical or clinical term is important. And why I talk about this is you're laying the foundation for self-awareness, self-image, and that small part of body image, especially in our adolescent clinic when we talk about females, to be aware, to feel good about your body, to be empowered about your body. So the sexuality starts at a very young age when children know, girls and boys, the swimsuit idea that's private, and then you can talk about, when that's private, that's special, it's your own body, and who should touch and who shouldn't touch. A foundation for any safety issues, but on up through any intimacy issues. And then building upon that as they grow older, asked and answered. And when, I'm not sure in Bloomfield Hill School, when you have the sexuality talks within the school district, is that still an important piece of the curriculum when they talk sexuality? I hate to say old school, very archaic, but sometimes reiterating that with your children and disseminating that information again to them in a way that they understand, because sometimes children don't internalize the information brought into school as well as they do if their parents are talking about it. So as they go from a toddler to elementary school into high school, it's always kind of building about that foundation you start at a young age. So when you talk about sex, when you talk about intimacy, when you talk about relationships, there's an idea, the difference between intimacy, relationship, and the physicality of sex. and then the need for protection and to be empowered by that. So when we talk about, the piece that I brought with me is the wonderful, wonderful little handouts of what appropriate sexuality is, preschool, kindergarten, up to 4th grade, and then I think 5th grade we start the middle school process. But being aware of the sexuality issues or normal behaviors in an age group, okay? I do agree in the United States, we think the answer is just turn it off, and that doesn't happen. And the other piece I wanted to put in there, because as I work with children through Beaumont, I work with children when they're able to talk, which is about 2 years old, all the way up until 18, they're in high school with Dr. Mammel. And one of the things that I always am trying to portray is that there isn't, the reality is, and even medically speaking, we don't always have everyone in a male camp or in a female camp. There's a spectrum of sexuality. Okay, I'm getting the validation from our medical person over here. But and I think in today's society, it's become more open in the United States. Back in historic times, it was seen as you were held in high esteem if you were bisexual, and we kind of forget about that part. And so, being comfortable with that, I'm not saying that everyone deals with that, but that's something to be aware of too, especially in society, on the media nowadays, and same-sex marriage. It's in our vernacular. We have partners. I was watching one of the award shows, and because I try to keep up with all the adolescent things, and I was flicking through, and a gay gentleman had kissed his partner right there on national TV, and embraced him, and I can just see a 5-year-old little boy going, "Mom, why did they do that?" And, those are the things that I think we need to be aware of what's happening, because although it might not be within our realm of normalcy, that's something that is a part of sexuality, and it does occur, and it's intimate, and it's not like most people, but there are some people that do that. So I think it's because, again, we don't know if our children might be homosexual, and I think it's a travesty to negate that. And what happens is that their self-image, self-confidence, and everything is so diminished when we minimize or negate that type of sexual behavior. And in the realm of human nature, that is appropriate. I like to give anecdotal information as well. I remember, this was many years ago, I had a woman that I knew in the community, and I do private practice, and she came up to me, she said, will you see my son? He's 10 years old. I said, sure. I love working with boys. I had 4 brothers, so I feel like I have a great knowledge base. And I said, absolutely. And I said, well, can you give me just a little idea of what you think the issue is that you want me to work with him? He goes, I think he's gay. And the reason why, and I said, well, I don't know about that. I can't change that. I can't do anything about it. But what I want to do is to make him feel good about who he is, whomever he is. So we worked on strengths, developing his self-confidence, his self-awareness. Never talked about that, sexuality, but being strong about who he is and validating feelings that he had about his likes and dislikes and what would happen if you went to school and you talked about, and I use this as an example, if you like to do hair. If you say that, we had role plays all the time. I said, if that's what you like, then that's what you like. It's not right, it's not wrong, it's just what you like. Speed up 10 years. My husband comes home and gives me this card. This guy thinks he knows you and wants you to call him. And I looked at that card, and it was this boy who grew up to realize his dream of owning a salon. He's known all throughout the country. Of course, I called him, I went to see him, and he said to me, do you remember when I was 9.5 years old and you told me it didn't matter what people thought and what I believed in myself? See, I get choked up thinking about it, because he said, I still had that poster that we made about who I was. And he says, all through my adolescence, when it was hell for me, I kept that poster, and I still have it in my house. He goes, that is what I'm talking about. He was secure in himself, so it didn't matter what sexual orientation he had, and that's why when Dr. Mammel and I were talking about it, that it is how your children feel about themselves, that self-confidence. So they have the confidence to come up to you and say, I'm having this issue with, girls always say, my boyfriend, this and that. We got into a little bit of that last night. And I said, well, it sounds like you're compromising who you are. If he's pushing you, like Dr. Mammel said, they manipulate. What do you believe in and what do you think you want right now? And if he can't respect that, then is it worth having an intimate or even sexual relationship with someone like that? So the issue becomes your 3-year-old needs to know who they are. And so you can't do that in a 3-year-old. Oh, yes, you can. You start at that age and you build. So then sexuality doesn't become this big, horrific monster in the room when they start hitting puberty. It's been a natural progression. And I think that the other thing that works against us too is that, the behaviors, and I also think that clothing contributes to this. And then when you start out with, what's private and your body is important and you have to take care of your body. And, when you look at some of the clothes that are out for young girls, it's very inappropriate. So when a girl can understand, starting at a young toddler age, that their body is important and there's private parts and I have to take care of it, they're not, wanting to think about wearing these other things. It's easier to have those conversations about those clothing lines that are out there. And I know that everyone sees them and you think, oh my gosh, that's inappropriate. Well, I think that we have so much out there that children get confused. And parents are the best for that. It shouldn't happen on the playground, when kids are validating for each other what is appropriate sex. And that's another thing Julie and I were talking about. I just wanted to throw out there is defining what the act of sex is. Sex is on forms. Kids, 10 years old. Oh, it says sex on this form. What does that mean? Well, you have to define what sex means as male and female. And then there's the act of sex. And there's another term for that. So those are the things that really confuse children. There's sexual behavior. Okay, sex is not intercourse. Intercourse is part of sexual behavior. And then we have oral sex. And then sometimes our adolescents get caught up, oh, that doesn't count. Absolutely, it's sexual behavior. And then sex is just not the physicality either. It is the emotion that goes in it. And that's when in this Netherlands study, when you talk about the readiness and having that conversation, that knowing what you want, what you need, and allowing an adolescent to process those feelings. It's just not trying to shut down raging hormones. And I think that for a long time, our process about this in the United States is to, shut them down. And abstinence. Well, I try to be pragmatic and realistic about these things. And it's a human biological process. And I think that if they're empowered with the right tools, the right information, confidence, and knowing that they have a go-to person, and it might not be mom, it might not be dad, it could be a physician, or it could be an aunt or an uncle, but as long as they know that there's someone that they can connect with, and that it becomes a normal process, because we want our male children and our female children to feel confident, good, and secure, not only about academics, but sexual health and socialization, intimacy, because sex is not intimacy. And sometimes that, children get that confused, and so when we're able to talk about all the parts that go into the act of the physical intercourse, you can talk about intimacy and feelings and love that, adolescents are capable as well. And I think what happens when we say, oh, that's just puppy love, oh, you'll get over it, that goes to minimizing and diminishing what they actually feel and not validating. So validating in appropriate ways. So I hope that gives you kind of the beginnings of this process. By the time when you are, you're pregnant, you have a child, and you're sitting there with the dad, and there you go, and you go, where's the manual on sexual health and all that? We don't have that. So I admire you for coming out on a cold Thursday. Is it Thursday? Yes, Thursday morning, and learning more about that. And my hope is that at least someone comes away from here with a piece of information, and then perhaps not only sharing it with your parenting partner, but sharing it with your children or another parent, so the information grows. So I really appreciate what BBFA does for parenting, because we really are working on the next generation and our future. So with that, I think Dr. Mammel and I want to just have open discussion and ask the specific questions. And she is one of my heroes in terms of
She's one of my favorite people.
So we have a mutual admiration, but in terms of her knowledge base and her wisdom when it comes to not only adolescents but children, she is a champion, and I really appreciate being able to work with her and be part of the process. So we'll answer.
It's mutual admiration. What kinds of questions you all have?
We're not afraid of anything. It's normal. It's normal. Yes.
I just want to say I lived in Germany for many years, and the attitude, whereas here in this country sexual education starts with an event, sitting down and talking with your children. In Northern Europe and Scandinavia, it's more like teaching your child table manners or shaking hands and making eye contact at the same time. It starts from a very young age. It's very casual. What you see on television is very casual. Not casual in a vulgar way, but
right.
You'll have a soap commercial with a completely nude woman bathing, taking a shower, making that soap commercial. Or at the beach, it's not a problem at all. First of all children up to 3rd, 4th grade are completely nude.
When they bathe.
Nobody wants to buy a
swim.
Mm-hmm. And then it's perfectly normal for an adult at the beach or at the swimming pool to take their clothes off completely and put on their bathing suit if they want to.
They're very comfortable with their bodies.
Nobody stares. It's perfectly normal. Here, we make an issue out of it, and it's so confined, and so just the fact that we need to sit down and talk about it becomes, an issue. And it's a thing that's, I don't know what the right response is, but over there, every girl at 14, 15 goes on contraception, period. Their mothers take them, they're on the birth control. It's just a whole different attitude without being vulgar.
Right.
Without being,
it's truly viewed as wholesome and
right.
a component of you as a person, just like your athletic abilities are part of you as a person, or like you said, table manners.
Right.
And so teaching, we teach in all these other important areas. We need to teach here too. And most of the teaching we do with our kids when they're young, we don't think of it as teaching. Maybe when we're sitting down to help them read, but as we're teaching them the alphabet and colors and say hello to Mrs. Jones and all of that we're teaching them continuously, and so we can be teaching them just naturally through daily activities from the time they're young.
And I think that you said here sexuality or sexual education, sex education is an event in the U.S. And then in Europe, it's a process, just like you said, and the process, and it comes on and building that foundation as you grow. And just like anything else, you change and you evolve and you develop. So, that building block for table manners or socialization starts at a young age, and so should this continue to grow. So I hope that we start the new generation of this process.
Just to piggyback on that, I think there's a level of shame,
Right.
And I have your philosophy. I raised from day one my children, taught them the right names for their anatomy, because I felt we don't call our arm a thingamabob. We don't call our leg a gigawatt.
Right.
I mean, why would we name two private parts of our body something else? Because it induces shame.
Right. It's not, and confusion, and I think the other part too is that we have confusion. Then that said, okay, what is right, what is wrong, and kids start this process, so it wears down on their sense of self and their awareness about their self. And the other piece to that is that we also need to educate, which I was just sharing with Julie earlier. I had a grandmother who has a guardianship of her little granddaughter, and she said, I found her touching herself, and I went in there and I told her never to do that again, never touch her. And my heart just sank, because right then I think that seed of doubt, confusion is with this child, and we have to let children know that physiologically touching our private parts, which is okay, because there are private parts, could feel good. Okay, and so when you say that, oh, we can't tell them that, but if we tell them no, not to do that, then what are you setting your child up for down the road?
So it's like, this is private.
If you're going
as
to do
opposed-
that,
but it's not bad.
you go and shut the door. If you want to do that, that's fine, but you don't do it in the living room when your brothers or sisters are around, which, you know, kids do. They're not inhibited, but we have to teach that culture of it's okay, but it's a private time. And like that, nonchalant. Not like, I could just imagine this poor grandmother. She said, I told her not to, and she was, and in my office 3 days later, she was so intense about it. And that really kind of just said, oh, you know, I feel bad for the little girl. So we're going to rewind that, and we're going to work through it with Grandma. But that's just an illustration. Anyone else?
Sure, there's else. Go ahead.
You talked about the inappropriate clothing, and I feel that way, but adults and children I see all the time inappropriate. So what do you tell your own child? Adults and other children are wearing these clothes. I mean, without making that person seem bad. I mean, anybody can wear whatever they want, but how do you let your child know that that's probably not the best choice to make? There's nothing wrong with those people for wearing what they're wearing, but we shouldn't do that.
I think you're doing a great job right there. You separate it from the person and who they are and ask, what kind of signals do you think that sends? What kind of signals do you want to send to your friends? Do you realize that while you may be comfortable wearing that, it might be very distracting to someone of the opposite gender in class with you? The teachers are having to, the schools are having to set dress codes to keep the distraction level down. I've had with my own son, girls who are dressing too provocatively, and I'll say, isn't that a problem? Well, sort of, not really. And I said, well, I don't think it's appropriate, and so I think we need to talk about that. I wouldn't allow your sister to dress that way, so I'm not going to allow someone else to come into my house dressed that way. I really want you to see each other, but I want you to have a good relationship and one that doesn't put either of you in an inconvenient position that you don't want to be in. And I'm happy to provide an extra sweater or a t-shirt or something if need be. And that was sort of, then he had a discussion with his girlfriend and let it from there. But sometimes they need more involvement from us. They may not be willing to have that discussion. I think a lot of it is if we know the parents of our kids' friends, we can talk about it amongst ourselves and talk about, I'm not letting her wear that dress to prom or homecoming. Or I think it's been very helpful that the school principals in the district set a dress code for some of these big events too, and they tell them, if you come dressed that way to prom, we wouldn't let you dress that way at school, so the same dress code holds here. Things can't be too revealing.
This is hard for me because I don't have that in my vocabulary. I went to private school, so we had a very strict dress code, and I just grew up with that and thought that was,
What's the focus of that environment, though, in school? Is it to show cleavage? Is it to learn math and English? And if you are spilling out or having to worry about this or tugging over or doing this, are you really focusing on what that environment is for? That environment is for learning. It's not to have to worry about your clothing inhibiting learning. So, and then I say that maybe it's, if you dress appropriately, maybe it's easier for you to learn math. And like Kathy said, always use humor, because can you imagine if you were wearing that sleeveless top underneath that? You would always be pulling on it, and then gosh, what would happen? You might, fail that test, and then what are we going to do? And stuff like that. So they can take that and normalize it to the environment. And I'm sorry when you wear shorts, those whatever they call Daisy Dukes and things like that, you're distracted by that. Why? Because they're always feeling uncomfortable. And I would say to my daughter in certain situations, see what she's got to do every 2 seconds? What's going on there? And I think that kids innately can pick up on that if you just point it out in terms of environment. Are you talking about a daughter?
I have a son, talking, I was thinking through in my head, oh, how would I have a conversation with my child, you know, and he's going to ask, well, you know, why, he won't just take what I say, he'll continue to ask questions, well, why is that inappropriate, and, you know.
The greatest question, why do you think it's inappropriate?
Exactly. Get his views and opinions.
He's probably
Ask
right.
his values.
And then you just have to validate. Then you're off the hook.
How does that make you feel in that situation? What would you like it to be like? And I think turning it back on them and letting them know we're all ears to hear what they think is really helpful.
So did your son's girlfriend then dress?
Yeah, I would say things improved. Things improved, and you know, he was validated that it's okay to have this standard. That, you know, it's. I have sexual feelings and hormones and everything, but I don't have to put myself in a vulnerable position. Is what I wanted to teach. That you can speak up and say where you think you're most comfortable, because that's what communication in a relationship is about.
And involving that intimate relationship first, it's all about that readiness. You know, not just moving into the sexual activity itself, but looking at the intimacy and respect for one another and what is appropriate and not appropriate. And I think that that's the piece that we kind of miss. We jump over all that other stuff and get to the actual sexual behavior, and we don't look at mutual respect. And I always ask adolescents, do you have an apartment? Do you live by yourself? So, no, why do you ask that? I said, well, you live with parents that probably have certain expectations and certain rules and ideas of what, you know, appropriate adolescence should be. And so you have to kind of, you know, have a good relationship with them and see where they're coming from, because you have to respect them as well. It's just not your girlfriend or boyfriend.
We also, in the healthcare, will try to teach when we see kids inappropriate. I still remember in my adolescent medicine training, my mentor, when a teenager would come into the office wearing too short of shorts or too low of a neckline on her shirt, he would hand her an exam gown to put over her clothes, and he'd say, I'm not going to talk with you when you're sitting there dressed like that. You know, our exam gowns would cover more, you know, and he'd laugh about it, and they would come back the next time not dressed in such a revealing way. So I think, you know, there are ways we can give that message.
Well, I have a question. I agree with you, the dress codes and all that, and I'm very conservative. But like you were trying to teach us, the European way, they probably let their kids go like that, because that's who they are. So I'm kind of at a crossroads. I'm trying to be more open to my children.
But that depends on their confidence level too, and the environment and the culture that we live in. So if you're, you know, in Europe, and that's the culture, but you still start with that child being self-aware, confident. That's the piece. Whether it's in the culture of the U.S.
It's kind of be our culture. I think that young kids are all dressing. You know, I agree. The shorts are so short.
But see, the practicality of that too, and again for the environment. Okay, if you're going to do that and you're in school,
right, school
and see, or even out on dates or anything, or you're going to a dance and you're doing like this, yeah. It doesn't look.
And I don't know that they necessarily dress in a sexualized a way in Europe. I think some of this sexualized dressing is from these pent-up, repressed kind of view of sexuality. Yeah, they may strip at the beach to change into their to swim, and then to change back in their clothes. But then they don't necessarily wear overly revealing clothes when they're in school. That was not what I observed there.
What's available in the stores to purchase is completely different there than what it is here. I cannot find, my daughter needed some church clothes, and I can't find anything that is appropriate for church.
Here.
I had to go online and buy her a little skirt and a couple of tops that aren't cut, that aren't adult women's clothes down to size.
And see, and that's a practical issue. Now, for church, that in that environment, you should not be wearing this kind of thing. That's practical. Just like in Europe, it is practical. How many of us, you know, but it's not in our culture that you have a wetsuit on, you're full of sand, you just want to get it off before you. That's a practical process, but that's not in our culture. And I concur with you in terms of our clothing. With my daughter, it was horrible trying to have her be age appropriate. She was tall and 10 years old, and excuse me, but I always thought there were junior hooker lines. That's the only thing I could find. And I did not want to give that message at all. And the other thing about it is that I think she's gone on the other end of being so self-secure, because she just realized when she tried on a wedding dress for the first time that, oh yeah, I do have a figure. I said, all this time you didn't realize that? She goes, I guess it didn't matter until now. So, it's the mindset that you create, that we don't have to have everything pulled in and have lace up this and the tights. A little 5-year-old girl in the pediatric clinic, she was having sensory issues. That was a diagnosis. The mom brings her in, and she has on those tights, the new ones that are the compression type things. And she says, my daughter has sensory issues. And the therapist went and looked and said, well, and the mom had similar things on. And the little girl, as they're having the conversation, I was part of it, consulting on it, and the little girl goes, well, Mom, I just don't like to be uncomfortable like you. 5 years old. I thought she got it. That is something, Mom thought that she had to have those with the short little thing. That's not fun when I go to school and slide down the slide. Practicality in the environment.
Yes. Don't you think, though, that I think our culture is changing, and I have teenage girls, and it's very difficult, as you were talking about finding clothes appropriate for church. You can't go to a local store and buy a pair of jeans. They don't sell jeans that aren't skin tight. If you go to any high school or any public middle school, I was watching the other day as I was waiting for my daughter, every kid coming out was wearing the skin tight jeans. When we were in school, we didn't dress like that, so I think for us, looking at the way these kids dress today, we think, oh my goodness, but that's just the way, at least with the jeans, the kids dress.
They're mostly covered.
Well, they're covered. I mean, they're skin tight. There's nothing left to the imagination with these jeans. But, I've said to my girls a number of times, how about a bigger size? How about a different... First of all, you can't find a brand that isn't like that. And the thought of a bigger size, well, they don't fit, Mom.
They would, but that's the whole body image they have.
But on the other hand, I am very pleased that my children are comfortable dressing, they're not concerned or overly aware of their bodies. And
I bet they are.
The
most important part of self-esteem for teenagers is their physical appearance. And because they're teenagers and cognitively they're undergoing this shift where they start to appreciate other people's perception of them and perspective of them. They don't just think, that everybody sees the world the way they do. They start to realize they can see themselves as an object, and so they're more self-conscious about that. That one little pimple, they think the whole world sees, when really we have to tell them, nobody else really cares.
But they'd be more
conscious. That's why their wardrobe and what they're wearing is so important, because they want to fit in.
Right. Because if I said wear the bigger jeans, they'd say, well, everybody will stare at me, I'll stand that. There is that fine line as a parent, that you're walking, because you don't want them being the odd man out. On the other hand.
Well, I guess that goes back to the question, why do you like those jeans? Why do you want to wear those? And then that gets in the conversation, because everybody else wants is to do it, and everyone else, well, do you want to do that? And I'm thinking about girls that, when they wear those tight clothes and they wear those tight-fitting compression things and the infections that they can get with that and the practicality of that. And so if they can have that mature conversation and they can process that whole reason with you, then there becomes a negotiation factor. But I really do think that, going through it myself, I think I went way to the other extreme because my daughter didn't care at all, and she says it has nothing to do with what I look like. And, that the balance is true, and that is the art of parenting, as with anything else, is the balance. You want to have the freedom and the independence, but they need to know the practical issues as well. Well, don't come crying home to me when all the guys are staring at your butt, and you're going to say, oh my gosh, everyone was looking at my butt. Why do you think? And then let them see if they can give you the answer.
And I do think there's a spectrum out there. They're not all wearing the tight, skinny stuff. I see a wide range of kids coming in. I think kids like developing their own styles, some of them, and there's ways with, especially now when they use the secondhand shops and stuff, they put together their layered looks and things like that, and funky clothing patterns, and they don't have to look as, tightly zipped in and still be fashionable. So I think that helps as well. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to ask your opinion. My husband was talking to a counselor one evening about various things, about us, about him, about our kids. And he brought up the fact that my 13-and-a-half-year-old son never seems to want to go to bed. He was concerned that maybe he had, like, insomnia, although he sleeps fine through the night. I think just because he's getting older, he needs a little less sleep, and he stays up late, and he likes to read. So he's been going to bed later and later. And she suggested to my husband that maybe he should masturbate. Maybe he has tension. This is what she told my husband. Maybe he's tense, or maybe, he has a girlfriend, maybe he has sexual thoughts and fantasies, and maybe that would help him sleep. And my husband's telling me this, and my 13-and-a-half-year-old, well, he'll be 14 in April, is very small. His voice hasn't changed yet. He's still like a little boy. So my husband said, I'm not sure he's ready for that. And he just really felt that was a little too early for him to bring it up, let alone suggest that he do it. And I wasn't really sure what.
Well, I don't know that I've ever heard someone specifically give that recommendation. And I take it she did not meet your son.
No, she has not.
Oh, okay, so it was like in a counseling session or something. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we all need coping strategies and stress management, and we need a whole range of them in the new millennium. Adults, kids, everyone. It's probably more important to teach stress management than, higher level math in our schools, even though I value higher level math. But we all need a range of coping strategies. And I think the most important ones for kids are strategies where we are communicating and interacting with another human being, whether it's talking to your parent, talking to your best friend, talking to a grandparent or some other adult you trust, that's going to be the most helpful. We also need things besides talking for when we're not ready to talk, whether it's, hitting the basketball around, whether it's punching a pillow, whether it's going down in the basement and stamping your feet and screaming if that's allowed in your house, or Therese's favorite, punching bubble wrap. But we all need ways to calm.
What's keeping him up? Is there something
He could be doing that already. He could be doing the activity that this counselor already. So, when we don't know that, and
progression from toddlerhood,
right.
And there's variations. Another great website, though, to help with stress and sleeping, the American Academy of Pediatrics.org/stress, and they have sort of a step-by-step thing that kids can sort of set up a program for themselves to manage stress, and it includes good sleep hygiene. It includes not having your bed be a worry place. You maybe set up a little chair or cushion in the corner of your room that's the worry spot. So if you're having trouble falling asleep, then you get out of bed and go sit there and either journal a little bit or listen to some music or distract yourself with something else, a book or whatever, and then you get back in bed.
Do you think it was an inappropriate recommendation?
Well, not without going into all the detail, I would say it's a highly unusual one in my spectrum of exposure of what people recommend. I think we have another therapist in the audience too, besides Therese. Have you heard that before, Dr. Brodsky? I mean, I would say that is, yes, a coping strategy in the whole spectrum that people have, but why would one single out that particular one? We usually give a range of suggestions.
Did he have does he have Mountain Dew every day after school? I mean, there could be a lot of different things, and I think to jump to that, if you've not done any foundational sexual talk yet, and you come home and you ask a 14-year-old that, I know what happens. Dr. Mammel and I were in the office last night. My 23-year-old son stopped by, and I said, "Oh, so sorry." I said, "We're doing that sexual talk tomorrow," and of course my son is like, "Okay, my mother is going across the line. I just had to say the word because it was with two females, and with a physician no less. And he was already getting kind of like, I got to get out of here. Give me the check, you know. So I don't know if I would, looking back, and I don't know if you would do it with your son at 14 and just come and ask him that question. They wouldn't take it very well.
I mean, I honestly just think, like, that's the only time of the day where he's alone. You know, he's at school all day, and then his brother's at home bugging him, and he's doing his homework. It's like his only time that he can just read what he wants to read and be alone. He wants to be up for that.
Is he falling asleep?
Normal for
Yes, he's falling asleep during the day.
Having a going to bed routine that helps you unwind is really important.
Right. And I think that's the problem. I think our bedtime was early for so many years, and my husband's like, "Why are you staying up really late?"
Well, and that's their biological clock.
But do recognize that teenagers actually need more sleep than they did when they were going through elementary school. You know, it's the next time in your life after infancy, toddlerhood, when your sleep requirement actually goes up, and it's at a time in our lives when kids get less sleep because they have more homework, more activities, partying on weekends, etc.
That became an issue because I think like that, and yet he never wants to go to bed. Never wants.
Does he have trouble getting up in the morning?
It's not bad.
But isn't it true, though, with adolescents, their clocks are totally different. They don't kick in, you know.
You can't go to sleep early. I'll say, I need you to go to bed.
Right, but they, in the morning, I mean, their body...
Well, they have this greater sleep requirement. They have less of it, and our biological clock is actually a little longer than 24 hours. So under those circumstances, they have the tendency to have the clock go later, and they can get a sleep phase delay, and there's a way to reset that. That's something that is a whole different conversation.
I know he needs to sleep, but he's never tired when it's time to go to bed. He gets in this hyperactive mode at the time when I think he should be going to bed, and that's our struggle.
Is he doing sports right before that or taking a hot shower right before that? Because that'll keep you more awake, too. Your body temperature has to cool back down. Maybe we can come back onto any other sexuality questions with our last few minutes here. I'd be happy to talk to you after. Give you.
When we finally had the talk with my son about the actual intercourse itself, he can't get over, you know, we were talking about this family that has 19, 20 kids now. And all he thinks is that's how many times they had sex. Whenever he hears of anyone having another baby, they had sex. You know, my sister-in-law
How old is
has
he?
4, he's 10.
Okay.
My sister-in-law has 4 kids. Well, she had to have sex 4 times.
True.
That's pretty developmentally appropriate perception at that stage. You know, kids kind of think that that's kind of strange. Some of them think it's outright yucky and will say, I'm never going to do that. You know, it's like kind of mind-boggling to them. And that's developmentally appropriate and not something to be worried about. But you have to kind of stay with your child and not flood them with more information than they're ready for, but probably be just a step ahead so that they're comfortable asking what they need to ask.
How do you know at what age it's appropriate to, you know, go into the details of how things are born? I don't know, you know, I just don't feel.
Well, when kids start asking some questions, clarify what their question is. Like we've had examples of someone a kid will ask their parent, Mom, what's sex? And they're like, oh my gosh, I wasn't expecting this so early. And they launch into discussion, and the kid then says, so am I supposed to check the M or the F on the form? You know, that's really gender that should be on those forms, but it always says sex. So making sure we understand their question, but then just talking about our bodies initially, and then more relationships with people.
Just like the asked and answered. They ask you a question, answer to the question, and then see if that meets their needs. Well, I don't get it. Then you know you need a little more. And I think that's a good gauge, because that's what a lot of times parents say, oh, then they get into this big explanation and goes,
There's some stuff on this website that will help you with that, the Advocates for Youth or Parents here. There's also a number of great books. One of the ones that I really like for girls is called something like growing up, it's a girl thing to do, and I'm sorry, I can't think of the author right offhand. And you would want to preview the book before you read it with your daughter, because you would want to not just do it cover to cover right away, depending on their developmental stage. But they use a lot of humor in that book and suggest, like, to the daughter, you know, we can talk about things about your body or sexuality or sex at any time, and I just want you to know that if you ever need to ask me something about it, you can say, we need to have a women's business meeting. You know, they use, you know, humor like that to help them, and they just make it a special time to sit and talk with mom about these things, too.
And a lot of those books are at the bookstores, or if you go on Amazon, they have a section, so you had a...
I was just going to say, before you brought up books, that I bought for both my children when they were in middle school. The American Academy of Pediatrics puts them out, a book for him and a book for her about, I can't remember what they're called now. I'm sure you're aware of about how they're all about their bodies and their body changes and sexuality and you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm not sure the title either, but the media, it works to our advantage too when we take that opportunity. And there are a lot of great resources out there, but I would encourage you to sort of preview it before you know, let a kid just read it completely on their own, or do a chapter at a time, or that type of thing. So when we're lacking for words, we don't have to have all the information and all the words ourselves. There's resources, that can guide us, sorry about that, along as well, and help us with the words, or, you know, read it together or look it up together. But what the books and the resources online may not provide are the values that you want to communicate. And I think just coming back to, you know, being a loving, warm parent who listens, respects opinions, shares their values, that is really important. I'm going to just mention one more thing from studies on different parenting styles, that without warmth and involvement by the parent, children develop poor social skills and have low self-perceptions. Without support of their own autonomy, they have low self-reliance and low competence. Without structure and demands from the parents to some extent, they have poor impulse control and poor social responsibility. But if they have warm, loving, involved parents who support individuality and value their opinions, set limits, and monitor their activities, they're going to develop those 7 C's, the confidence and competence and self-control.